Welcome, everyone. We are so glad that you're here. Thank you for joining us. I'm so excited about getting to learn from Tara, Michelle, Nadine, and Mavis today. So first, I'd like to turn things over to Mavis Underwood, who is a Wasanich elder, PhD candidate, community leader, and also a wonderful governor from the Real Estate Foundation. Thank you, Mavis. Over to you.
Hajka, thank you so much for including me in this important forum today. I believe the work that is being led by our fellow Tara is just priceless, and I'm so glad to see other people becoming so interested in it, because really breathing action into the calls to action, I think, has been really life-changing for myself and for other people that are doing work of revitalization, resurgence, building respect, reasserting our history of place. And all of this work is really vital to whom we are as people. And also, we really need to push and pressure to change social policy, to make sure that it embraces Indigenous First Nations people in the best possible way, whether it's in a way of community development, or it's understanding climate action, or it's improving health services. I think we do need to work together in that good way. And often our forums will start with an opening prayer, and that is really to bring minds together, to ask for an opening of self to each other, to be able to see each other in that best possible way. What are people bringing to the table that can help? And I think that part is really critical as well, to changing the relationships, to understanding, building this dialogue of truth. Because I know for myself as Indigenous First Nations woman, it has been hard to actually have those experiences of truth and justice. I think so many of our relationships have been impaired under the Indian Act and its manifestation, and particularly the pressure of that on the existence and the vitality of women. And we have a long way to go before we change things, but creating these hearts and these minds and hands operating together, I think, is going a long way. I just have been so excited to be involved with the Real Estate Foundation and have them actively, work with me and respect the youth in our communities who have been really struggling for a long time to find place and purpose. And so that to me is really critical. Like, we need to make sure that they have a sense of place in the future, and that they also have the knowledge and relationships that they need to keep building for the next generation and the next generation, so that we will continue to exist as distinct people. So this work with UNDRIP, it's we're taking it away from being words to actually translating it into actions and relationships and partnerships and ways to influence each other and build strong voices and do it, like I said, in the best possible way. So I just wanted to communicate to you that idea about why we do a prayer, an opening prayer. It's not to assimilate people into any kind of religious doctrine. It's about relationship with each other. We offer up a prayer that there'll be some opening of our hearts, our minds, our spirits to each other, and that we will not harm each other with our words, that we will understand that, maybe some things are hard, some things change, some shifts are made, but we are trying to do our best to work together. And sometimes it is really tough. It is really tough to stay at some of those tables and, hear about history, and to hear about the hurt and the trauma. But sometimes that is part of the change making. We have to see sometimes what Indigenous families have gone through, and the struggles for Indigenous communities to really develop a sense of economic independence. And for myself, finding voice has been really important, as we deal with violence and family breakdown. Finding voice is really critical to that. Accessing health services that understand the need for mental health supports at the grassroots level is really critical. And for myself, it builds hope, you know, where you didn't have hope before. It builds energy. It renews energy in the best possible way. People bringing the skills and expertise that they have to the table. So I was really excited to, Michelle, your work with City of Vancouver, just such a great opportunity. I've always been impressed when I would go to schools in Vancouver and see the diversity of humanity in the schools. People who have come from all around the world to settle in Vancouver and bring their children to school. It was just incredible for me always. I was supposed to be there for Indigenous First Nations, but I met people who had come from Vietnam and China and Hungary and everywhere. And it was always exciting to me. And it was exciting to me that Vancouver did try to make a place for Indigenous First Nations women, particularly who were at risk of losing their families. Vancouver was, I think, ahead of the game. The notorious, what they call Region B, and children and families had made transition spaces for mothers. And they had done a lot of responsive things in the 1990s, just because they saw, you know, there is too much overrepresentation of Indigenous First Nations in the system, and we don't have enough support for the resources, and they took a great leap of faith. So I've always been impressed by some of the efforts that Vancouver puts forward, and as well this idea of the yellow. Oh, sorry, I'm losing it now. The Y2Y. Yukon to Yellowknife. I think that conservation area is so important, as well as that whole discussion of American and Canadian relationships, because for us, we often don't see that border. It's about our family connections and our ties to each other. And the idea of conservation areas, to me, it started around what brings us together as Indigenous people down in Oregon and Washington State is family connections, but it's also a tie to salmon. It's also a tie to freshwater and saltwater systems, and it's ties to a lot of culture and teachings. So just really quite excited that the idea of a conservation area allows an opportunity to put an umbrella over teachings on the land and honoring a sense of place and really changing the narrative to invite Indigenous First Nations to speak openly about teachings and that pedagogy that's about learning from the land and learning from each other, and it spans the generations. And I think that's so important. So with all of that, I just want to say thank you so much, Tara and Sherry and Stephen, for hurting me all the time. I really appreciate it. I appreciate your work, the energy that you put into it and your skill. And for our folks that are here at the table today, um, I really appreciate that as well. I'm sorry, I'm a bit blurry. I've been reading all morning, and so my eyes don't transition back. So you all are a little bit blurry, but I can see good eyebrows on you all. So that's good. So I just wanted to say thank you, Haichka, from the bottom of my heart. I just really appreciate this opportunity. Haichka, Haichka Hela.
Thank you so much, Mavis. We are always so lucky to have you welcome us in and to open our hearts and minds to the matter at hand. And in this case, UNDRIP and relationships and voice, so much there. Also, just letting people know that Mavis very kindly jumped out of a really important meeting to be here with us. So we're going to let her get back. But that meeting does have to do with the assertion of rights and title of her own people. And so, yeah, we hope that goes well. And thank you so much for joining us. So before I turn things over to our speakers, a couple of things. I'm Sherry Yano. I'm calling in from unceded Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh territories, also known as Vancouver. I'm with the Real Estate Foundation, and we are all very grateful that you've taken time out of your busy day or week to join us. So if you're willing, please introduce yourself in the chat. Maybe give us your name, where you're calling in from, and if you have an organization that you're affiliated with, anything you'd like to share. It'll just give everyone a sense of who's in the room. So thank you for doing that if you're able. I know it's sometimes very hard to do if you're on your phone. So we're also hoping to have a brief time for you to ask our wonderful speakers some questions towards the end of the webinar. So hoping for about 10 minutes. That'll be closer to noon Pacific time. So when the webinar ends or closes. So if you do have questions, please put them down below. See the little Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. Just put them in anytime. So don't use the chat for questions. Use the chat for your introduction. Use the Q&A box for questions. Okay, we're going to be recording this webinar, or we are recording this webinar. You'll get a link to it afterwards. And now it's my pleasure to get to introduce the speakers. So first we have Tara Marsden, who is Gitnell and is currently working with the Real Estate Foundation. So lucky us, we get to be a client. She's an UNDRIP fellow, and she's helping us better uphold and advance the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, or UNDRIP. So Tara is the sole proprietor of Hlama Sustainable Solutions and has strong expertise and experience in Indigenous sustainability, reconciliation, governance, community-driven research, land use planning, and policy development. So over to you, Tara.
Thank you so much, Sherry. And thank you, Mavis. Even though she's had to leave us, it was always such a pleasure to be welcomed by Mavis and to share space with her as well. Thank you, everyone, for filling out the pre-webinar survey, if you managed to do that as well. And it was great to see the folks who we have joining us and wanting to learn and wanting to embark on this learning journey with us today. This is my homeland. I live in Hazelton in the Wilkes-Barre territory of the Gitxsan Lachiep, and I am going to talk to you today about the UN Declaration, and you're going to hear some more examples from our other speakers, but this is sort of your 101 in a very condensed fashion. To start, in our Gitxsan cultural protocol, I'll introduce myself properly. Naxginkw es Wilkes-Barre Winskawit, Lachkaneda Kpategi, Susan Marsden West Nachai, Barry Marsden Mingemgen West Nagwadi, Kathleen Marsden Skawat West Nadziti, Solomon Marsden Gamlochelt West Niet, New Hazelton Wilkes-Barre Lachiep Winjugai, Lu Amfgadi Nun Gayasam, and the translation is on the right. It's very important for us to ground ourselves and who we're accountable to, the territory that we're connected to, and our kin through our clan and our WILP. And this is a common protocol amongst the Tsimshian, the Niska, and other Northwest Coast First Nations. So the title of our webinar is UNDRIP You, and so we wanted to invite some curiosity, some self-reflection, especially for settler folks who are wanting to learn how to work better with Indigenous peoples, to partner, to ally with them. And so these are just some self-reflection questions to get your mind moving this morning. And these are not ones that you have to answer by email or in the chat or anything, but just things I'd like you to think about. And everyone is well versed in the territorial acknowledgement, so you know the territory that you live in usually by now, and are putting that in the chat, so thank you. But also ask yourself, what's the relationship, or my organization's relationship, to the land and to the Indigenous people where I live and work? And what effort have I put into learning about Indigenous history, laws, and culture and language? And what are those current priorities of the Indigenous people where I live and work that I can help support and align our work with? And am I looking for shortcuts or quick fixes, or resisting the complexity of this work? And in this work that I do, working with non-Indigenous organizations especially, a lot of people are a bit anxious, a bit worried about making mistakes, and kind of looking for that how-to booklet or that manual that's going to tell them how to be perfect and to not make mistakes. And that's not what I'm here to talk about today. I'm here to talk about international legal framework and how it can be applied at different levels. And it is a complex process, and it's a learning journey, and it is full of complexity. So these are just some reflections that you can guide you through the work as we go through today. So some basics around the application of the UN Declaration. So the first thing for people who are still new to it, and we saw that in the survey results that some people are still new to this, but the UN Declaration is not new. It was adopted at the General Assembly of the United Nations 16 years ago. And so I'll tell you a little bit about Canada's experience and the opposition to that, and why it's taken so long for Canada and BC to come on board as full adopters. So it's also really important to know that federal and provincial legislation is really only the Crown's interpretation of UNDRIP. So UNDRIP has to be upheld and breathed life into by Indigenous peoples themselves. And so each individual nation has their own perspective and approach that has to be respected. And that provincial and Crown legislation is there to guide that government, but is not the final word by any means. These articles are minimum standards as well. We hear from many nations that they want to go beyond UNDRIP, that this is just a starting point, and that is also to be respected. And so there's touch points as well, so they can be referred back to multiple times when you're developing different projects or when you are designing strategies, that they're touch points. The articles are very well drafted and are inclusive of global Indigenous people. So there's key concepts around free, prior, informed consent. That was one of the key stumbling blocks for the federal government of Canada. They did not want to see consent of Indigenous people be the foundation of resource development, especially. Similarly, redress, the notion that there is a reconstitution of lands that have been taken, or that there is financial compensation for lands that have been taken, another stumbling point as well. The right to land itself is really the guiding point for the right to self-determination, to culture, to language, and spirituality. So the land being the foundation for the rights that flow from that. So there's many ways to look at the UN Declaration. This is just sort of a quick snapshot of UNDRIP by the numbers. And so what are we talking about? We're talking about over 400 million Indigenous people globally, about 6% of the population, and really organized into 5,000 distinct groups or nations. It took the Indigenous people of the world 36 years to complete this declaration, with the final passing of it at the Assembly in 2007. Prior to that, Indigenous people were lobbying what was called the League of Nations even before the UN was established. And so this is a long time coming. It's a long journey, and we need to be respectful of those ancestors who have gotten us to this place. So again, there were countries that opposed this at the beginning, and those were Canada, the US, Australia, and New Zealand. Since then, they have thankfully removed their objector status. There's one country of note, Russia, that has maintained its abstention status, though, along with a couple others, but in terms of land base, they're the most significant. In BC, we have 204 First Nations, and our population of Indigenous people, which also includes Métis and Inuit, is close to 300,000 people. And we are also about 6% of the population, up from about 4% about 10 years ago. So we're a growing young population. And within the UN Declaration, there's 46 articles. Some of those have sub-articles. So it is a dense and a complex document, but it is also very easy to read and very easy to understand. And once those words are there, once people have all agreed to those, it's really up to each of us to interpret, to apply, and to breathe life into those articles. So in terms of implementation, one of the most important things to note is that this is an aspirational document. And so state governments are being encouraged to uphold these international rights. And what we're seeing now in Canada and BC is that it can be interpreted and woven into the legal framework, the legal case law that we have in Canada. And so there will be cases that you'll see this start to be applied, even though people will still say it is aspirational. Judges can interpret it and apply it to different cases regarding Indigenous peoples. So again, Indigenous peoples can develop their own approach, they can develop their own policies, their own laws, and even say that this maybe isn't that relevant to us. And you'll hear that from some Indigenous peoples and First Nations, that they have their own laws, their own ways of expressing their Indigenous rights. Equally important, these are not rights that are granted by the UN. That is a common misunderstanding as well. These are inherent rights, and that's right in the declaration itself. So enforcement is really limited because it is aspirational, but I would say it's not insignificant. I think civil society, any local government, NGO, institution, or funder can and should take action and develop their own strategies and actions, as the Real Estate Foundation is doing, as the City of Vancouver is doing, as well as the Y2Y initiative. So in terms of enforcement, in terms of compliance, one of the tools that the UN has is the position called the Special Rapporteur. And so in 2013 was the last visit prior to the one this year, where James and I visited Canada. And he was an Indigenous person from the United States. And he did basically a tour, a meeting with different Indigenous communities and leaders. And his remarks and his report back to the UN and to Canada were quite significant and were a help. It really helped Canada be seen globally to be holding back on human rights, to be in violation of these critical principles, and help them ideally, I think, remove that objector status. So in 2013, 10 years later, Special Rapporteur Kali Dezay visits Canada, and he meets with my friends here, Namox and Shay from the land defenders of the Wet'suwet'en, and he remarked upon the militarized invasion of both their homelands as well as the homelands associated with the Trans Mountain pipeline. And so really looking at resource development, free prior informed consent, and the militarization of police, and how that is affecting Indigenous rights and their ability to live freely in their territory and defend their territory from fossil fuel development. So this is an instrument that can be used to, again, provide some accountability, global accountability of Canada and British Columbia. With that, I'd like to say Doik Sit Nissim. I thank you all, and I'll return afterwards to talk a little bit about how the Real Estate Foundation is applying the UN Declaration to their work.
Thanks so much, Tara. It's always so interesting to hear the history of UNDRIP and the role that Canada has and has not played in its development and adoption, and will yet to be seen implementation. Next, we have Michelle Bryant-Gravelle, who is the Senior Director of Indigenous Relations at the City of Vancouver, and she's going to share some insights into the development of the city's UNDRIP strategy. So this is the first Indigenous-led local government UNDRIP strategy in North America. So Michelle is from the Tsimshian Nation, from the 9 allied tribes of the Laxkw'alaams. She has experience not only in local government and as an elected trustee for the Laxkw'alaams Settlement Trust, but also has long-standing experience in both industry and education, and as a member of many boards, including serving as the first Indigenous woman president of the Prince Rupert and District Chamber of Commerce. So welcome, Michelle.
Amasa, Vilhamna, Duayu, Gispo Guadom, Gilgiot, Stewel Zabu, Glapolam, Stewel Laku, and Simshan New. My traditional name is Vilhamna, and I come from the Gilgiot tribe of the Gispo clan, the Blackfish of the Tsimshian Nation, from the community of Lakw'alaams. And my mother is Karen Jeffrey. My father is Gillifax, Ken Bryant. My grandparents on my maternal side are the late Thelma and George Jeffrey, and my grandparents on my paternal side are the late James and Ruth Bryant, who I really turn to in the spirit world for a lot of the work that I do, and I want to acknowledge all of the gifts that they have brought to me and given to me. I'd also like to acknowledge that I am a guest on the unceded and traditional lands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations, and I am happy to be working in their beautiful territories. And I just wanted to comment on some of the things that Tara had talked about in her fundamentals presentation, and I really appreciated the reminder of the reflection, because I think in the work that we do, especially around UNDRIP, we need to reflect on where we are, what space are we taking up, and what space are we looking to create in our work environments. And I think that's really important. And also acknowledging that, you know, remembering that policies are created by people. Just because it's a policy doesn't mean it can't be changed, because those policies have been written so long ago, and they were meant to keep Indigenous people out of these places of decision. And that's what we are looking to change today. I'm going to share my screen with you to move into my presentation. So what I'm going to talk to you about today is where the city of Vancouver has come, where we have come from in terms of our history of reconciliation, as well as moving into where we are right now with our UNDRIP strategy. And also where we're moving towards in terms of our UNDRIP action plan and working with Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh as we move into this new uncharted area. So just to give some context and some history, it's taken many years for any recognition to happen for Indigenous peoples' territories extending beyond government-imposed reserve systems. So there's a lot of misconception out there that nation's territory is where they live. However, it's forgotten that those reserve systems were imposed by the federal government through the Indian Act. And the city of Vancouver has come a long way in the recognition of that and the work with the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh. Starting in the early 2000s, they began to change that through work on community art projects and public art projects, and in recent years has taken a more of a leadership role in working with the Musqueam Indian Band, Squamish Nation, and Tsleil-Waututh Nation in different initiatives. Going back to 2010, when the government-to-government relationship started between Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh as part of the 2010 Winter Olympic Games, and formulating the Urban Indigenous Peoples Advisory Committee in 2012, establishing council-to-council dialogue, so council dialogue between the City of Vancouver Council and elected council of each of the nations in 2023, and those have been ongoing annually with a slight pause during the pandemic. And between June 2013 and 2014, the city declared that would be the year of reconciliation. And following that, declared that they were the city of reconciliation and formally acknowledged that they were on the unceded territories of Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. Coming into more recent history, the council-to-council meetings are still ongoing. As I mentioned, there are staff-to-staff processes for referrals for the city's many projects which the nations wish to be involved in. And in 2021 to 2022, that is when we started the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples task force at the city. That was, I'll speak more about later. And in 2022, one of the wings of the city, the Park Board, has a motion to explore the co-management of parks with the nations, which is a huge undertaking and a huge step in the right direction on co-management of lands from a government to government standpoint. And I'll move into the UNDRIP strategy and looking at where we have been and going into where we are going. So back in 2021, the City of Vancouver explored a council motion to explore the task force to provide advice to the mayor and council on implementing UNDRIP at the city. The task force was convened and was collaboratively developed the UNDRIP strategy. So we had elected councillors from Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh, as well as elected councillors from the City of Vancouver working together to develop the strategy that has since been adopted in October of 2022. Prior to being adopted, the strategy was reviewed by external experts and advisors, and each of the councils from Musqueam, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh as well as the City of Vancouver, endorsed the strategy. It has 79 calls to action that are grounded in the UNDRIP articles on the rights under the 4 themes that are also the 4 themes of the provincial DRIP action plan: social, cultural, and economic well-being, ending Indigenous specific racism and discrimination, self-determination and inherent right of self-government, title and rights of Indigenous people. And I won't read all of these, but these are just some samples of the 79 calls to action from the UNDRIP strategy. The full strategy is on the city's website. So we have some social aspects that are around culturally safe and affordable housing for Indigenous peoples, access to cultural sites for Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people, items around economic for the VEC to bring its policies and procedures in alignment with UNDRIP and to support the economic prosperity of the nations. Looking at environmental racism to ensure that the city's environmental initiatives address environmental racism through the various plans and strategies that are currently taking place. And also looking at aspects around housing to work with urban Indigenous organizations to address the need for safe, healthy, accessible, affordable, and climate-resistant housing or resilient housing for Indigenous people in Vancouver, and ensuring that the secondary housing needs are also there, such as daycare and healthcare facilities. In terms of revenue sharing, this is an area that will take a lot more work, but just ensuring that there's capacity funding for the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh, as well as the urban Indigenous, to ensure that the work that the city is doing with the nations is funded by the city, because as we know, the nations aren't funded to do work outside of the organization. And I think this is a really key component when you're asking the nations to participate in anything, that you need to make sure that they are properly funded and provided for with their capacity for the project, or knowledge that you're wishing to get from them. And in terms of shared decision making, this is a key part of where we're moving to in the city, is identifying ways for Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh to assert greater influence on city strategies, plans, and projects based on genuine, free, prior, and informed consent, rather than mere consultation. So it's moving from the city saying we have planned this project and we've carried it through to the finalization stage, and we would like you nations to sign off on it. And we're moving towards, we have this idea for a project, and before we bring it into any planning stages, we would like the nations to be part of the co-development of it if they wish. So that's the place that we are moving to with our action plan and implementation for UNDRIP. And this is probably one of my favorite photos we had a ceremony, and it's a place of bringing ceremony into city processes. We had a ceremony once the strategy was finalized and endorsed by all 3 nations. Witnesses were called, and the document was formally handed back to the city to endorse and implement from the nations. And the picture really depicts the co-development, the co-creation, the working together, and that underlying government to government, recognizing Indigenous communities as a government partner in the way we move forward. Now going into where we are going in developing the action plan. So we've moved from, the declaration itself and moving it. We have developed the City of Vancouver strategy formulated by the task force, and we have called back the task force to also co-develop the City of Vancouver UNDRIP action plan. Following along the similar framework to the provincial DRIP action plan, following the 4 themes, but also, really co-developing the work as was done with the strategy together with the nations. So the intergovernmental process will continue, and collaboratively, the 4 governments will identify priority actions from the UNDRIP strategy to co-develop the action plan for implementation of these actions. It'll include priority actions for a 5-year period, which the city departments will be responsible to implement, create a timeline, and also create measures of success. And this was a really key part of it, because all too often these strategies, these plans get published, a lot of work is done on them, and there's no real measure for what has happened since they were endorsed or passed. That's not our intent with this strategy and action plan. And we plan to include measures of success in all areas for all 79 calls to action within this plan. And we are committing to report those out on an annual basis publicly, as well as to the nations, to see where we are in terms of our success in implementation. Everything will be collaboratively developed with staff from all of the 4 governments. Once the plan is developed, it will be and need to be endorsed by all 4 councils of the 4 governments. We are targeting completion of the action plan in 2024. We will have an update to nations as well as the city council in the fall of 2023 to see where we are at, and just to keep the timelines top of mind for all who are participating. In terms of how we will engage with the urban Indigenous communities, this has been built into the strategy that, to date, the focus has been the foundational work of the city on the government-to-government relationship with Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh, as they are the title holders to the land. Also acknowledging that many Indigenous people who from all areas of the country and outside the country do make Vancouver their home, and there is a responsibility to formally engage with that community as well. One of the next steps that we are planning is to engage with the diverse urban Indigenous community who are living in the city. And it will be a city-led process that runs parallel to the intergovernmental process with Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh. This will take place this year through a series of small dialogues and culminating in a larger gathering to report out and to take additional feedback on the strategy work that will then inform our action plan. Back in June of 2022, on the report to council, there were 6 early actions identified for implementation. These 6 early actions will be worked on this year between the 4 government staff to bring these into fruition. So ahead of the prioritizing of the remaining calls to action, these are the ones that are being committed to for 2023 start in 2023, and work on these first as we are working to prioritize the other actions. And there's a lot of work that needs to be done in the city of Vancouver, identifying that the city is the first municipality to undertake the declaration implementation to this level and to commit to co-development. And it's really groundbreaking work. There's no roadmap to how we do this. We also identify that mistakes will be made, but those mistakes will be made with a good heart and a good intent behind them. And like Tara mentioned earlier, we don't strive for perfection, but we strive to do the best that we can with a good heart and a good intent to move forward in a good way. And working with the nations on co-development is huge. As we've heard today already, even 3 years ago, we weren't in this place, and creating space, not just a spot at the table, but actual decision-making power for what happens on Indigenous peoples' lands that they hold title to. And, you know, I'm excited to be part of this work, and I'm excited to work with so many great people at the city. I can tell you that the willingness is there from all levels. And, you know, we're excited to embark on this journey with the nations. I'll turn it back to Sherry, or sorry, turn it over to Tara to complete her presentation.
Thank you so much, Nadine, Michelle. Just such a inspiring and hopefully motivating story for other municipalities and for others to learn from this. This framework, I can't say enough about. I'm going to tell you a little bit about how we've learned from it with the Real Estate Foundation's UNDRIP actions. And one thing that really I hope people heard and resonated was when you talked about shared decision making, and you talked about moving from bringing a fully formed project designed, you know, everything like developed, and saying, please, you know, endorse our project, to bringing a concept. And that's a huge game changer for so many nations. And that is a principle and a lesson that anybody can adopt, whether you're an NGO, local government, funder, anybody can learn from that and say, that is something that works. That is true shared decision-making power. So thank you so much for everything that you've shared with us and for taking the time. And we just really look forward to seeing what comes next. So I'm going to finish off with what the Real Estate Foundation is doing with the UN Declaration, essentially. And so the fellowship that I'm a part of, that Sherry mentioned, is a year in roughly, and we have a couple more years to go. And we're talking about making this a permanent feature of the foundation, that Indigenous people can rotate through the position essentially, and that it isn't a permanent commitment that people have to make. Maybe that someone like myself, who's a consultant or a leader or a former leader, could come and step in and continue to guide the work and continue to advise the foundation and how they deliver funds and resources out to different organizations and communities, and supporting land use and freshwater initiatives, as well as food sovereignty initiatives. So for many people, they are familiar with the Real Estate Foundation. They know Sherry and how wonderful everybody is. And for others, they're like, what is the Real Estate Foundation? Is it a realtors association, or is it what is it and what does it do? And so as a sort of a career grantee working for First Nations for about 20 years, I have become familiar with all the different granting organizations and what their money story is. And so this is where the monies are derived from, and if there are those strings attached that we have to be aware of. And so the money story of the Real Estate Foundation is quite interesting. So basically anybody in this place we refer to as the province of BC who buys a home, you put a deposit down. And so there is interest generated on those deposits on the real estate trust accounts. And so that interest is then invested by the foundation and then distributed out to various different community organizations, local governments, First Nations, and really with the intent to advance thriving, sustainable, and equitable communities. So this is actually a statute that has created this, this ability to take these resources and then redistribute them. And that's the Real Estate Services Act. So it's a provincial statute. So it has that connection back to the province and the responsibility and the duty of the province to uphold UNDRIP. And so it is not a government entity, but it is basically created through a government statute. So since it's been established in 1988, it's distributed over $100 million, which is significant. That's a significant impact. It could be a positive, negative, or neutral impact, but nonetheless, it needs to be acknowledged as a huge opportunity, I think. But equally important is to understand that these are revenues generated from the sale of properties on unceded Indigenous lands. And so if you think back to those key articles that I wanted to focus on, especially redress, is that these are funds that could help support, not to achieve the entirety of redress, of course, but to start and to look for those opportunities and for willing people. And the foundation is definitely willing to embark on this. So the work that I've been doing is trying to apply specific articles. So I've only focused on two. There are several that I've done this for the foundation, but taking the articles specifically and saying, well, how does this apply? How is this relevant to the work that you're doing at the Real Estate Foundation? And so FPIC, free, prior, informed consent, of course, is a critical one and one of the more challenging ones to actually implement and adhere to. And so where we're looking at these unceded lands being sold, free, prior, informed consent is clearly not evident in those transactions. And so how can, again, redress help to offset the impact, if you will, from that lack of free, prior, informed consent? In terms of things that the Real Estate Foundation can do is when they're looking at projects, that they want to support, Indigenous-led projects are much more likely to have free, prior, informed consent included in land-based work. Non-Indigenous led projects can include free, prior, informed consent through partnerships, of course. But how do we determine what the degree of that partnership is? And so we've developed a series of criteria and a series of questions to ask about those partnerships, because we've heard from many First Nations that sometimes those are very tokenistic, and that it really is just sort of sign a support letter, and then they don't have a lot of involvement after that. But you're going to hear from Y to Y and sort of what partnership building looks like for a non-Indigenous organization. Similarly, for Indigenous-led work, they can also be in someone else's territory. And so you heard Michelle talk about, the urban Indigenous population in the city of Vancouver, for example. So there's an example where free, prior, informed consent of the host nation or the affected nation might not be automatic just because it's an Indigenous-led project. So these are all factors to consider when a granting organization is looking at what projects to support. So the second one, again, a more difficult one for people to grapple with, is redress. And so again, when I look at the opportunity, and this is why I said yes to this fellowship, was I saw this huge opportunity for redress and potentially in a more permanent fashion. Right now, it's just looking at it and seeing what those opportunities are without changing the legislation, without changing the fundamental structure of the foundation. But learning from the city of Vancouver, again, is there is these longer term institutional changes that should not be sort of swept under the rug just because they're difficult, just because they're intensive and long term. So some of the ways that this can be done. So the Indigenous grant stream is something that was set up just as I was coming on as the fellow, and basically hives off a portion of the grant funds to an Indigenous grant stream. And it is, the projects are decided by an Indigenous leaders circle. And so this is one way to share that decision-making power and to ensure that a guaranteed amount goes to Indigenous-led projects. Similarly, where there are land-based projects that are looking at restoration of damaged Indigenous lands, this is another opportunity for redress. And so environmental restoration projects, the Healthy Watersheds Initiative was a great example of that, where the foundation administered and hosted healthy watersheds and supported 62 watershed restoration and monitoring projects across the province. Other examples include the support for land back research and other self-determination, Indigenous self-determination initiatives through grants and strategic initiatives. So the fellowship is first and foremost something that maintains my independence as an Indigenous person. And so when we enter into these organizations, these settler organizations, as some type of Indigenous relations person or staff member, sometimes it can be very isolating. Mavis mentioned that this morning. And you then get siloed off, that everything Indigenous goes to that person. And so it doesn't take that whole of government or whole of organization approach, which is what I recommended. So I wanted to be maintaining my independence, as well as working with every single staff person and looking for ways that they could help to uphold the UN Declaration in their work. Similarly, it's not focused on vague reconciliation commitments. It's focused on these international principles, these articles that Indigenous people have already supported and upheld. And it didn't start with me. The foundation was already very progressive. They had committed to the Declaration of Action, which has been brought forward by the Circle on Philanthropy. And that is a declaration to advance the Truth and Reconciliation Commission calls to action as well. So in my work as a grantee, I haven't seen anything else like this. And so I want to commend the foundation for taking kind of a bold step, similar to the city, and sort of saying, well, there's no roadmap, but let's see what we can do, what we can develop, and then share that learning out with other funders in the similar workspace. So as we look to what the future looks like, so there's been $100 million granted already. What does the next $100 million look like? And so throughout the next year, I'm going to be leading sort of the development of the transformative actions for UNDRIP advancement with the Real Estate Foundation. And so for the comparison, the city of Vancouver has the 3 host nations, whereas the Real Estate Foundation has basically all the 204 First Nations in BC that are somehow involved or affected or potentially interested. And so certainly don't have the resources to engage the way government consults, but a collaborative process inviting people in who have knowledge around grant making, knowledge around how to share decision-making power with Indigenous leaders, and to reduce, the administrative barriers so that Indigenous people can access the funds more easily. So this will provide a clear roadmap for potential and current grantees and really own and address that money story that the Real Estate Foundation has. Encouraging the peer learning in the funding community. Many funders are looking to this and are on this webinar, so thank you for your interest. And really that it's incremental, but it's also intentional, that there is a desire to look towards long-term institutional change and to look at this as an opportunity for how this funding entity can be a catalyst for change and a catalyst for the upholding of the UN Declaration. So we are borrowing heavily from the City of Vancouver's format. And so they have those 4 categories. So we've got the grants and funding, the organizational, institutional policies and process, and then governance. And these are just very preliminary examples. And so you start at what's the foundation currently doing, what are some of the early actions, what are some of the longer term change and deeply transformative changes, and then what requires actual legislative change. And so in this engagement, we'll be reaching out and sort of seeking to populate this. The staff already have a ton of great ideas, as does the board. And so starting to populate this and develop a short, very straightforward document that people can easily access and understand what the foundation is doing in regards to UNDRIP. So some of the preliminary progress, and this is not all to do with the fellowship. I won't take credit for, for most of this, but it's just showing how progressive the foundation is. And so again, I mentioned they set up the Indigenous grant stream. So there's a circle of Indigenous leaders who are advising and decision makers on Indigenous grants. And in the general grants category, a huge success is going from 5 to 60% Indigenous-led projects being supported this year. So a huge shift just in the criteria that are applied alone and the types of questions that are being asked at the intake process. The Board of Governors has gone from 1 to 3 Indigenous board members, so huge shift. Again, Mavis being the sole Indigenous member for a while, and now having 2 other Indigenous board members. So a shift in the decision-making for the foundation as a whole. And I mentioned earlier the strategic program funds. So this is outside of general grants, supporting land back research projects, as well as the Right Relations Collaborative. And so this is another groundbreaking initiative that is really turning philanthropy on its head and reversing the power dynamics of funders and Indigenous communities. And so support to them outside of the general grants cycle is just another way to support different models for philanthropy and Indigenous rights. And with that, I will close again. Doik sit nissim, and I thank you all. And I'll turn it back now to Sherry.
Thanks so much, Tara. Yeah, I just want to give a shout out. Tara's work as an UNDRIP fellow is really transforming the way we think and the way we work. And I will also acknowledge her in just the generosity, just to remember as settler organizations that it is easy to do the easy things and you pat yourself on the back, but it's really rich learning when you tackle the hard things together, and that it's a rewarding journey. That journey is its own reward. I know that probably sounds hokey, but it comes to my mind again and again when we get the chance to work with Tara. So next up, we get to hear from Nadine Raynolds from the Yellowstone to Yukon initiative. Nadine has been an organizer, an educator, a youth mentor, researcher, local government official, and is now the manager with the communities and conservation team at Y2Y. So over to you, Nadine, for some insights on Y2Y's learning journey on UNDRIP.
Great, thank you. And I'm just going to share my slides so we can see them. Can you see the slides? Great, thank you. Thank you so much, Sherry. I'm really, really honored to be part of this gathering. And thank you, Tara and Michelle, for everything you've offered today, these experiences, these insights. My name is Nadine, and I live in Naxginkw territory on Slocan Lake. And I work with a really wonderful team and many, many partners with the Yellowstone to Yukon Conservation Initiative, or Y2Y. We are a nonprofit organization. And we've certainly been on a learning journey over the last 30 years of this organization's life. So we continue to grapple with the truth that conservation work in the past has been a very colonial process. Settler hunters, seeking to secure exclusive access to animals, this view that white people are better at taking care of the environment, that we need to somehow create a pristine wilderness. And in fact, as many people might know, Yellowstone is the first national park in the United States, and it violently evicted Shoshone, Lakota, Crow, Blackfoot, Flathead, Nez Perce peoples. So the colonial history of parks and protected areas is not pretty. There have been efforts, there continue to be efforts to reconcile the past, and Y2Y has taken some leadership in changing the way conservation work is done. So the Y2Y geography stretches about 3,400 kilometers. You can kind of see it on the map on the right, and it overlaps with at least 75 different Indigenous territories, the map on the left from nativeland.ca. And in 2002, we actually hosted Indigenous peoples from throughout the region, not everyone, but who we could bring together. And that gathering really helped identify some common ground. And some really important issues and themes emerged that were then incorporated into Y2Y's strategic planning processes. A gathering like this has not occurred since, but we really would like to do it again. And we'd like to do that in partnership, and we're hoping to do that next year. But in the meantime, otherwise, we continue our learning and our sharing and our support in a number of other ways. So shortly after that gathering, Y2Y was supporting Indigenous-led conservation proposals in the north, which we may be familiar with, Nahanni and Naxginkw National Park Reserves. And these are very large co-managed protected areas. So Y2Y's vision, which is shared by many partners, is an interconnected system of wild lands and waters, stretching from the Yellowstone in the south to the Yukon in the north, and harmonizing the needs of people with nature. So we support and partner with Indigenous people who are leading initiatives for healthy lands and waters. And today, about 25% of protected areas in Y2Y are managed or co-managed by Indigenous peoples. These are some of our partners in the Peace region. This is actually a celebratory photo at the signing of the Caribou Partnership Agreement in February 2020. On the left, we have Chief Roland Wilson of West Moberly and Ken Cameron of Saulteaux First Nation on the right, and that's my colleague Tim Burkhart, based in British Columbia in the middle. And this is a historic example of Indigenous-led conservation to protect and recover mountain caribou. These nations literally brought mountain caribou back from the brink of extinction and are leading the development of one of BC's largest new protected areas. So how we work together and the kind of support Y2Y provides to Indigenous communities is really guided by and created in collaboration with the Indigenous partners who are leading conservation efforts. For example, we support some nations with a range of communications, and we can use our platform and our influence to amplify Indigenous projects, stories, and work. We helped produce the film Caribou Homeland. If you haven't seen it, it's a great film to watch, and it's about West Moberly and Saulteaux First Nations and their work to restore caribou food sovereignty and traditional culture. And again, like, this celebrates Indigenous leadership, which has created the most successful caribou recovery program in North America. And also, thanks to RFBC funding, we're now working with a public relations firm to expand this campaign and further amplify Indigenous voices, and really sharing the partnership agreement as a model for how we might do conservation in the future. So, like all of us, our communications work is dynamic and it's evolving. Sometimes we do very specific things like these social media examples. But I think in a broader sense, Y2Y is really trying to contribute to a shift in the narratives. This has come up already, the narratives within mainstream media that really often focus on dominant culture. And over the last few years, Y2Y created a speaking platform for Indigenous leaders to talk about worldviews, laws, and their visions for healthy lands and waters. And this was done through a series of workshops on ethical space. We developed this work with Gwen Bridge. There she is on the left. She is an advisor for Y2Y, and she has offered us tremendous guidance. So we try to act as a catalyst for change. This particular programming actually convened about 1,500 people and created a lot of interest in the concept of ethical space. We actually had about a third of our participants were staff from the province of BC. And that allowed Gwen then to offer further workshops and presentations. She's now guiding local, provincial, and federal governments, helping them change their approaches to engagement. We also work with Reciprocal Consulting, which is an Indigenous consulting company based in Vancouver, who is helping us explore ways to decolonize and evolve our internal processes and practices, like HR, like procurement, how we host meetings, and a lot more. And I think, you know, we all have a lot of internal work to do, and Y2Y is very fortunate to have the advice of Gwen, the advice of Reciprocal, and others. And so we're on the trajectory of awesomeness, as Gwen calls it. It's actually trademarked. You should check it out. The trajectory of awesomeness. We can all be on it. But our learning journey in ethical space has been an interesting one, because Y2Y is a very science-based organization. I think a lot of conservation organizations are. And so advancing UNDRIP and this learning journey includes reconciling ways of knowing. And Western knowledge has often invalidated Indigenous knowledge. In ethical space, we bring together these two worldviews and ways of knowing for the benefit of all beings. Bringing Indigenous worldviews and conservation science together when we talk about proposals for Indigenous protected and conserved areas is extremely powerful. This is the essence of two-eyed seeing, and I think a way that Y2Y can contribute to Indigenous initiatives. We also provide support on the ground, such as with monitoring and supporting Indigenous Guardians programs, which we're doing in the North, again, thanks to REFBC funding. Y2Y is also investigating the human dimensions of conservation at a more deeper level, sort of the social science aspect of this, and exploring Indigenous research methodologies and how Indigenous knowledge can be a greater part of our integrated science approach. So there are multiple actions that Y2Y and I think all NGOs can take to advance UNDRIP. And it isn't always easy because we're so embedded in settler society. And it's really about personal growth and organizational transformation. So at Y2Y, we have policy documents and we have required readings and trainings, but we're also really trying to nurture culture within our organization. And I think the conservation movement more broadly to do things in a good way. And this means listening. It means embracing Indigenous worldviews and laws. It really means taking time, creating space for relationships, for dialogue, and for being in ethical space. It means trying, learning from successes and mistakes, reflecting, as we've talked about, and trying more. And I think it's really about creating a new practice, which takes practice. So thank you so much for having me here and being able to share a little bit of our story. And thank you to everyone who's doing their best to advance UNDRIP. I really appreciate the Real Estate Foundation for hosting this. And I know there's some other funders here as well, and who support this journey that Y2Y is on and our partners are on. And I think it's a real gift that you give in joining on this journey and ensuring we can all take the time and the space to build these meaningful partnerships and explore these areas of uncertainty and find new ways, you know, to work together that can be for the benefit of people and wildlife and all of nature. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Nadine. That was really, really amazing. So I just, it's so great to get to learn from leaders who are on the trajectory of awesomeness. We're big fans of Gwen's as well. She was one of our advisors on our land award, one of our land awards committees. And yeah, we were really grateful to have her, but that is something to aspire to for sure. So great to get to learn together. Okay, so I'd like to open it up now to the three of you, Nadine, Michelle, and Tara, to add anything. Now that you've kind of heard from one another, do you have any responses, reflections, or questions to add? So I don't know, who would like to go first? And I will note that, like, with amazing, fabulous women, you are on time, like, but to the second. That never happens. So, like, amazing. Anyway, so we do have time. Please feel free to jump in.
Yeah, I can say something here, and I just want to acknowledge Nadine and Tara for the work that you do, and so many others out there who are doing this work. You know, as I mentioned when I spoke, even 3 years ago, these conversations were being had, but they were being had quietly, and you know, it's really uplifting to know that we are doing this work while on different parallels. We're still doing it, you know, we're doing it in parallel on different trajectories and all moving toward that trajectory of awesomeness that Nadine mentioned. And you know, it warms my heart because doing this work prior in my experience, it's been hard. It's been for the people who are blazing the trail, you know, making that trail wider or even creating a new trail has been really difficult. And for Indigenous people specifically, carrying that emotional labor that goes along with the work, as all of these things, as we decolonize spaces, we get re-triggered by the generational trauma that comes with it. So people who are doing the work to unpack and look at what UNDRIP means for you and your organizations, I really want to invite you to acknowledge the mental and emotional spaces that Indigenous people have to walk through as we do this work. And I remind my colleagues of that all the time too, because it is heavy. The work we are doing is exciting and it's groundbreaking, but the work is heavy. And as Indigenous people, we don't get to turn that off at the end of the day. You know, other people, CEOs, presidents, organizations, they may carry a heavy load in terms of responsibility, but they don't carry the load of being Indigenous in a cruel world who targets Indigenous people. And, you know, the very reason the UNDRIP was created in the first place. and the very reason that we are all doing the work that we are doing to create safe spaces and create spaces for Indigenous people to be seen, heard, valued, and be part of the decisions that we make.
Thank you so much, Michelle. Yeah, I completely agree, and you've put it really, really well. I wanted to reflect on another one of Nadine's at the beginning, you know, the image of the Indigenous people being removed from Yellowstone. And my kid's dad is a Cree, and they're originally from around like the Jasper area, and were also removed when the national park was created. And so when I bring my kids back there, it's such a beautiful place, but it's got that painful history, and the rest of the world gets to enjoy it. So I think that was quite brave, like to own that and to really say, this is our origin story. It's not that great, but we have to do something. We can't just be sad about it or feel guilty and not take action. So thank you for sharing that. And I think I've heard others say this, and what I'm hearing from Michelle too, is that this work is healing, and not in like a fluffy way. I read an article this morning about the physical health impacts of systemic racism, and that it can affect your cardiovascular health, it can affect your autoimmune system, it can affect all of your vital functioning organs. And there's now, you know, the scientific proof. And so the healing, when you hear people like Nadine say those things, it's healing, it's restoring the health of our bodies, because we have always been put in a position where we have to prove ourselves, we have to justify ourselves, we have to put up with the microaggressions and the marginalization. And so I just can't say enough about people who are joining us now and are trying to make that change. So thank you, Sherry and Nadine.
Thank you. I appreciate you sharing that. And it's for sure a journey for all of us, you know, and I think it was interesting, the comment about being perfect. And I know I'm someone who has suffered from that, from, you know, trying to be perfect. And it's so complex and it's so challenging, and we're going to make mistakes, and we're going to have to own those mistakes and keep moving ahead in a way that I guess it's, you know, for me, I've realized it comes down to those relationships and having conversations, because that's how we learn together and figure out how we're going to do this. And Michelle, during your talk, and I'm curious, both of you comments on governance and co-governance. And I spent 7 years as a counselor in a really small community in the village of New Denver, only 500 people, very different than Vancouver, but I have some local government experience. And at Y2Y, you know, we work with Indigenous governments, we work with the province, federal, all levels of government, all orders of government. How do you see the future if we forecast, you know, ahead of ourselves, when we really see what we want to see as far as you know, what UNDRIP is advising? What does governance look like? What does co-governance look like when you think about the sort of, I'm thinking of a province of BC and local government in particular, with the experiences that you both have shared.
Yeah, I can jump in on that one first. And this is my vision of co-governance, is really to move to that place. I mean, there's steps that are needed that we are currently looking at right now, in terms of, you know, Vancouver charter changes that we're looking at proposing to allow for that shared decision making between Musqueam, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and the city of Vancouver. But that longer term, what does that look like in co-governance, is really acknowledging the nations, not just for the sake of acknowledging that this is their territory, but allowing that economic revenue sharing. What does that look like? And exploring what that looks like, so that, because that is one area where reconciliation really hasn't taken a foothold yet. And I say yet because we are at our ceremony. One of the witnesses commented that we are on the first page of the first chapter of this book, and we are writing that book. And in terms of, you know, what does that economic revenue sharing look like in a field of reconciliation for the nations? Because historically the nations have been left out of that conversation completely, and those conversations are just being had today. So really looking at exploring what that looks like to bring prosperity into the nations that we are working with. Because, you know, I've always said Indigenous people have been legislated into poverty, and what that co-governance looks like is having the nations decide what success looks like for them, having the nations have their voice at the table and making those decisions. So, you know, I can't give you a definitive answer on what that looks like, but it is rooted in making sure that the nations have a voice that is equal to the government.
Yeah, I could just share one insight maybe or teaching that I've learned is it's the people, you know, making the decisions, but it's also the principles, the teachings, the laws that they're upholding. And so, you know, Michelle and I, we come from similar Somali speaking peoples, and there are ways to include people in our clans, there are ways to adopt people, there are ways to give people roles and functions within our society. We're inclusive, but there are, you know, roles and responsibilities and protocols to be followed. And so I think in addition to sharing those decision-making powers in colonial structures, there's also really bringing back and reviving and teaching what our cultural practices are, because they kept us going for thousands of years, and the land was in pretty good shape by the time Europeans showed up. And so there's some wisdom there that we need to all adhere to if we're gonna make it as a civilization.
Thank you so much. I guess I was thinking about how you often talk about relationships and connections. All of you have mentioned those things, and how this is another effort that really connects us, like us on the settler side, to listen and to learn, and you know, and to uphold that leadership, the co-governance or the stronger governance of the nations on their lands. Yeah, I'm just gonna move. I know we could listen all day. I would love it, but I do want to take a few questions from the audience. So I'm just going to move us to questions. So thanks so much for your reflections. So while we're asking questions from the Q&A box, I'm going to invite all of you out there to please feel free to comment in the chat about any insights or reflections that you have to share. And I also have two questions for all of you. If you'd like to respond in the chat, you can respond to either or none, or just say whatever you like. But the first question is, how can you and your organization act to advance UNDRIP? So what practices, values, or approaches could you change up to better uphold UNDRIP? Or maybe you've already started things, like what are you doing to shake things up? So the first question, again, how can you and your organization act to advance UNDRIP? And then the second question is, what would the world look like if we were all upholding UNDRIP in a meaningful way? Like, what would an UNDRIP compliant world be like? So answer either of those, neither of those, share your reflections, but we'd love to hear from you. So I'm just gonna open the questions here. It looks like 11 have come in. I did look earlier, and I was gonna go to the ones that were around municipal work first, just and group them together. So we have a question from Leanne. It says, Michelle, thank you so much for sharing your inspiring and important work with us. Could you share a little bit more about the co-development process? What has it been like so far? Things that worked well, surprises, and stumbles. I'm just going to group them together. So that was Leanne. And then Lisa asks, did Michelle say the city of Vancouver was the only city taking the declaration into action and implementation? Are any other cities across Canada taking on this important work? So don't know if other cities have reached out to you to learn from your work. So maybe Michelle, I'll give those questions to you, and then Tara and Nadine, you're welcome to chime in with comments.
Yeah, thanks, Sherry, and thanks for the questions. In terms of, I'll answer the first one first, co-development. So just to provide some context, I came into the city 7 months ago, and the work of the strategy was just coming to completion. And but from the homework that I've done and the work that I'm doing right now as we continue through the task force that we now call the Intergovernmental Table, the co-development has been a priority. So the city really stepped back from, colonial policies, procedures, structures to really work with the nations to develop what this co-development model looks like for the strategy. And that's exactly what we are doing as we are working toward the action plan. We have, again, taken a step back and really taking the direction from the nations, because that's what co-development is, making sure that the nations have their voice and the way they want to move things forward, working together, not saying that we're taking a step back and letting the nations lead the way, but we're really partnering with them in a true partnership as we work to prioritize the 79 calls to action. We're still at the beginning stages of that. So our intergovernmental table has met once. Our steering committee, which would be the senior staff people from each of the governments, is meeting next week as to work on the prioritization of the 79 calls to action and see where they fit into the initial 5-year plan. I can't unfortunately comment on the stumbling blocks. However, there hasn't been many, because the communication and the dialogue has been open from the get-go, from my understanding, and still is. There's gentle encouragements, there's gentle reminders, but the willingness on all parties is there. When the co-chairs, of the Intergovernmental Table, which is Chairperson Chasalem from Squamish Nation and Chairperson Boyle from the City of Vancouver, when it was being brought to council, one of the comments from Chairperson Chasalem was that the process of the strategy was one of the best processes that they have worked through as the 3 nations, and that was a huge compliment, because we all know the colonial systems for any level of government to involve nations at that level and to get that level of compliment, was really heartwarming. And we at the city did not take that lightly. And the work that I'm doing in my role at the city. So the city took it even further and created a department specifically to Indigenous relations. I have a staff that is growing, and we are working to advance this work and implement it in all departments at all levels of the city, at the direction and in cooperation with the nations. And in terms of the second question, as far as we know, we are the only municipality in Canada, possibly North America, that has actively adopted this United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, and are working towards implementation in our city systems.
I was on a panel with Michelle's colleague, and the mayor of Saskatoon was on the panel with us. Aftab was there, Michelle. And so they were getting really excited, and they're kind of embarking on that. So I could definitely see, the cities with large urban Indigenous populations that have the resources as sort of following suit. But what I think is really important, even for smaller communities, is there's a framework now that you've built for people, and that they can easily, not easily, but more easily modify it and customize it to their own situation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. Someone in the chat. Yeah, the City of Mission just did an awesome webinar with the nation there, and a land back initiative was really inspiring as well. So check that one out.
Nadine, did you have any comments to add? Okay. I'm going to try to group a couple of questions together. And yeah, I'll just put it to you, and not sure if there's yeah, so Marilyn is asking about the 69 white paper policy that has not been abolished. How do we utilize this DRIPA or UNDRIP to continue to protect our lands, waters, and people, language, culture, and future generations, and not be assimilated into the white paper process that is still alive? And then there are questions also that are related to Lori as asking about the relationship between UNDRIP and the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And should organizations, like, how do you integrate the knowledge from both and marry that? And I think I'll just start with those. So maybe, I don't know, Tara, do you want to take that one first?
Yeah, hi Marilyn. So I think, yeah, this is where I don't try and be a cheerleader for the provincial or the federal legislation. I think there's a lot of shortcomings to that, but it doesn't change what's in the UN Declaration. And so in the work that I'm trying to do in education around UNDRIP is that each nation can, just as I've done with the Real Estate Foundation, applying those articles and saying, what is the relevance here? What are the actions that can be taken? And I've done the same for Gitnao, my own nation, showing how our different policies and laws are relevant to, and how different UNDRIP articles support the work that we're doing. And then that's used really as your foundation to advance those, that because the governments have committed to UNDRIP, that this is your interpretation, that is paramount. The white paper does still stand, unfortunately. The Indian Act does still stand, unfortunately. Undoing those, and I'm going to jump to Pete's question at the end about doing away with band councils. It's another great question. UNDRIP speaks to Indigenous peoples being represented through their chosen bodies. Is that chosen body a band council, or is it the hereditary system, or is it a hybrid? That is up to those individual Indigenous nations. And so it's a very empowering document if it's used in that way. But if it's a situation where people are waiting for the provincial or the federal government to tell them how UNDRIP is going to be implemented, it's not empowering. And so that's why funders, people who want to support Indigenous people and actually self-determination are, I think, much more promising than waiting for government. And the Truth and Reconciliation. So Truth and Reconciliation Commission is Canada-based. The UNDRIP is international. Truth and Reconciliation heard from residential school survivors, had a number of hearings, and has also calls to action. A lot of those calls to action are around adopting and supporting UNDRIP, so they're linked in that way. But the distinction there is that it's focused on the residential school legacy and survivors, and repairing and healing that damage, whereas UNDRIP is international in scope and dealing with a whole suite of Indigenous rights that are inherent to Indigenous peoples globally.
Thank you so much. There are so many good questions, and I really apologize for not being able to get to them all, but I do want to let us close at the on time. So this has been an extraordinary conversation, and I really want to thank our speakers, so Tara Marsden, Michelle Bryant-Gravelle, and Nadine Raynolds, for generously sharing their insights, experience, and expertise, and of course to Mavis for opening this webinar. We are so incredibly grateful to all four of you for the work that you do and for being here and sharing with us today, and for all the barriers that you are breaking down. And as you say, it is not an easy thing, and we just raise our hands to you in thanks. So huge thanks to everyone who came out today. We're so appreciative. We had 800 people register, and we were just blown away by the interest. And if you're interested in more webinars like this, please feel free, or please consider signing up for the Real Estate Foundation of BC's newsletter, and we'll make sure that you receive these invitations. Finally, for any funders among you out there, Tara and others in the chat have been speaking, or Tara will be speaking more about UNDRIP for our sector at the Environment Canada Funders Conference in May, so you'll have another chance to hear her speak. She also mentioned the Right Relations Collaborative, and that was mentioned in the chat. And of course, Michelle spoke about the UNDRIP strategy that was developed with the host nation. So please do check out those resources online. I also want to give a quick shout out to my colleague, Stephen Hoy, who was running everything, dropping things into the chat and making sure everything worked and doing all the comms to promote this. So thank you, Stephen. We'll keep the webinar open for a few more seconds so people can finish any thoughts in the chat. But thank you so much for spending time with us today, and please feel free to sign off whenever you wish. Thank you.